Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind, Dad said. Split it with Chloe, or you'll never set foot in this house again. I had always been the quiet one, the one who gave in, but not this time. I said no. What they didn't know was that Grandpa saw this coming, and he left a clause in his will that would change everything. If you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, if you've ever been told, you're strong, you don't need praise. If you've ever stayed silent to be accepted, this story is for you. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the power to finally say, enough. I don't remember what I wished for on my 7th birthday. Maybe because I never believed wishes were for girls like me. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table in our modest house in Eugene, Oregon, a paper crown slightly too big for my head slipping over one eye. The cake was a tiny one from the grocery store, half-frozen vanilla with a thin layer of frosting and 7 lopsided candles my dad lit with a match that smelled like burnt toast. There was no music, no balloons, no friends invited. Just my parents and their outdated digital camera clicking in the corner like it had somewhere better to be. Make a wish, sweetheart, my mom said, half-focused as she checked her phone for work emails. I closed my eyes and wished, not for a dollhouse, not for rollerblades, not even for a party. I wished to be seen, to matter, to feel like I wasn't just filling space in someone else's story. 3 years later, when my sister Chloe turned 4, I stood barefoot on the back porch and watched as our yard transformed into something out of a fairy tale. A woman dressed as Princess Elsa twirled near a cotton candy machine next to a bouncy castle surrounded by squealing toddlers. There were helium balloons tied to the swing set and a Disney soundtrack blasting through hired speakers. The cake was twice the size of mine, with Chloe written in piped pink frosting, surrounded by edible snowflakes and glitter. Why didn't I get a birthday like that? I asked quietly. My mom laughed, not cruelly, just distracted. Because you're older now, honey. You don't need those things anymore. But I was still a child. I still wanted to wear a sparkly dress and be told I was special. I still wanted someone to look me in the eye and say, "This day matters because you were born." That was the first moment I realized. In our house, the spotlight wasn't meant for two, and I had been cast as the stagehand for Chloe's performance. It didn't stop there. When I turned 10, I spent an entire year saving my allowance, walking our neighbors' dogs and collecting soda cans to buy a pair of sky blue rollerblades I had seen in a magazine. The day I brought them home, I beamed. I couldn't stop smiling, until Chloe saw them, threw a tantrum, and cried for 30 minutes. That same evening, our dad took her to the store and bought her a pair, twice as expensive, with LED lights on the wheels. When I protested, my mom knelt beside me and said the words that would become my childhood's silent anthem. "You're older. You should understand." That phrase followed me like a ghost through every injustice, every overlooked moment. When Chloe got a brand new pink bicycle with a unicorn horn, and I was handed a hand-me-down with a broken seat. "You're older. You should understand." When Chloe's stick figure drawing of a house was framed in the living room, while my painting from art class sat forgotten in a drawer. "You're older. You should understand." When I made the volleyball team and no one came to my final game because Chloe had a stomachache. "You're older. You should understand." I understood. I understood that Chloe's tears were a crisis and mine were an inconvenience. I understood that love in our home was loud and visible, just never for me. My accomplishments weren't celebrated. They were tolerated. When I brought home an A+ on a math test, my dad said, "Good. Now, keep it up." When Chloe got a C+, Mom took her out for frozen yogurt. I learned to swallow my disappointment like medicine, bitter, necessary, and expected. I told myself if I worked harder, if I excelled enough, maybe I could earn their pride. I joined every club, aced every test, folded the laundry before being asked, packed Chloe's school lunches. I wasn't just a big sister. I was a substitute parent, a built-in tutor, a backstage manager for the Chloe show. But the more I achieved, the more invisible I felt. In 5th grade, I won 2nd place in a statewide writing competition. I rushed home, certificate in hand, heart pounding. I placed the paper in front of my dad, my eyes wide with hope. He didn't look up from his computer. "That's nice," he mumbled. "Now, help your sister with her homework, will you?" Chloe once spilled juice on the carpet and cried. The entire family rushed to console her. I once fractured my wrist playing outside. No one noticed until the school nurse called home. The neglect wasn't loud. It didn't scream in your face. It whispered. It whispered that I was fine without attention, that I didn't need affirmation, that Chloe's needs were urgent and mine were background noise. When I was 12, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and whispered to my reflection, "Maybe I don't need anyone to be proud of me. Maybe I can do it alone." But even then, a small voice inside me whispered back, "You shouldn't have to." I began to believe I was made of smoke, there, but never solid, present, but easy to overlook. I was the forgotten candle, lit briefly, watched without care, then blown out to make room for the next celebration. By the time I entered high school, I had stopped expecting applause. The first major accomplishment of my teenage years came in the form of a large white envelope from the National Youth Leadership Forum. I had been selected as one of 20 students from our state to attend a prestigious academic summit in Washington, D.C. I got in through a rigorous selection process. Essays, interviews, a portfolio of work I'd curated late at night between homework and part-time shifts at the library. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it like it was made of gold. I walked into the kitchen, heart racing, the letter trembling in my hand. My mom glanced at it. "That sounds like a lot of pressure. Are you sure you can handle that?" She turned back to her grocery list. Dad didn't even look up. Chloe was sitting at the table watching videos on her phone. When I said I'd be going alone, Mom just nodded. No one asked if I was excited. No one asked if I needed help packing. When Chloe forgot her science project at home the following week, my dad left work early to deliver it. That moment crystallized everything. I wasn't the fragile one. I wasn't the one they worried about. I was the one who could handle it. So they stopped showing up. Not because they were too busy, but because they had decided I didn't need anyone. But I did. I needed someone to say, "This matters. You matter." I threw myself into achievement like it could fill the silence. Debate team captain by sophomore year. Editor of the school paper. I led a peer mentoring program, coordinated a coat drive, and was in the top 1% academically. On weekends, I volunteered at the city library, teaching kids how to read. I was 16 going on 35. Fueled by caffeine and quiet desperation. When I aced the PSAT, no one said anything. Chloe got a B in her literature class, and my mother baked her cookies. "Look at you," Mom said, ruffling her hair. "You're getting better every semester." Me, I had straight A's. I'd been getting better since I was 7, but apparently, effort mattered more when it came from Chloe. It wasn't about envy, it was about equity. About being seen as someone worthy of praise, not just expectation. I began learning to drive using my Aunt Carol's old Subaru in a grocery store parking lot every Sunday. Aunt Carol was kind, but she didn't have time to teach. So, I Googled how to three-point turn and practiced in the fog, sometimes stalling 5 times before I got it right. Chloe? She got a shiny used Jetta for her 16th birthday and private driving lessons with a certified instructor. "Don't be upset," my dad told me. "It's because she's more anxious than you." No one asked if I was anxious. If I ever felt scared. If I cried alone. One night I opened a letter from my mom. Not a handwritten one. Just a printed response to a financial aid request I'd submitted for a college campus visit. I needed help covering a $220 plane ticket to attend an interview at a summer program hosted by Clarkford University. I had made it to the final round. The letter said, "Elena, I'm proud of what you're doing, but we just can't justify that kind of spending right now. Chloe needs new braces, and we've been saving for her trip to New York with her dance friends. I'm sure you'll understand. Love, Mom. I didn't cry. I just folded the paper 3 times, slowly, deliberately. I slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, where it joined the other "not now" notes that had quietly accumulated over the years. That night, I put on my headphones and played one of Grandpa Harold's old jazz cassettes. The hiss of the tape, the warmth of the saxophone, it steadied my breath. Grandpa had passed when I was 13, but I still remembered the way he'd look at me when I told him my ideas. How he once said, "Elena, you've got more fire than this world knows what to do with." I believed him more than I ever believed in my parents' excuses. So I sold my childhood guitar, posted textbooks online, picked up extra hours at the library, and bought that plane ticket myself, alone, but not defeated. I remember looking out the window of that plane, watching the clouds split apart to reveal the West Coast disappearing beneath us. It should have been the proudest moment of my life, and in a way it was. But it was also hollow, because achievement, when earned in silence, starts to feel like survival, not celebration. And that was what my life had become. A quiet fight to be visible, to be undeniable. If I couldn't be loved for existing, I would be admired for excelling. Be so good they can't ignore you, people say. But what happens when they do? What happens when you become excellent, and still they look through you like you're made of glass? I started to wonder if my whole identity was built on the wreckage of being overlooked. I was good at everything, except asking for help. Because every time I did, the answer came back clear. You're older. You should understand. And I did. I understood I wasn't their priority. I was their backup plan, their proof of parenting success, but never their chosen one. Getting accepted into Westbridge University was supposed to be the moment everything changed. It was one of the top schools on the West Coast, low acceptance rate, cutting-edge research programs, alumni who ended up in places that made other people raise their eyebrows in impressed surprise. I had worked toward it for 4 years with quiet obsession. When the acceptance email came, I stared at the screen for 5 whole minutes before I let myself believe it. Then I printed the letter and walked into the kitchen, heart pounding. My mom barely glanced at the paper. "Westbridge? That's a hard school, Elena. Are you sure you can handle that kind of pressure?" She didn't say congratulations. She didn't smile. She just returned to stirring Chloe's tea. It wasn't just doubt. It was dismissal wrapped in concern, masked disappointment. Maybe she didn't want me to go. Maybe she didn't believe I'd make it. Maybe she just didn't care. I left the letter on the counter and went back to my room. But not before Chloe asked, "Wait, is that the place with the fountains in the front?" I nodded. "Oh," she said, "my friend got waitlisted. She's freaking out. Good luck, though." That was it. No hug, no celebration. Just 2 hollow syllables. Good luck. I packed my bags myself, took a Greyhound to Seattle, and dragged 2 suitcases up the hill to the dorms, while other students arrived in SUVs packed with boxes and parents and teary hugs. No one came to help me. I carried everything alone. It felt symbolic in a way. At first, I tried to dive into the excitement. Westbridge was gorgeous. Red brick buildings with ivy-covered walls, libraries that smelled like cedar and history, professors who'd published books I once borrowed in high school. But I wasn't just a student anymore. I was a survivalist in a new jungle, trying to keep up while pretending I wasn't drowning. I took a part-time job at the campus writing center. Then I picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop downtown. I joined a research assistantship to boost my resume, all while taking 18 credit hours of intense coursework. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. Ate mostly from the vending machines outside the dorm. My body grew thinner. My thoughts got darker. I stopped answering calls, not that many came. Mom would occasionally send a text. "Did you see Chloe's new TikTok?" But never asked how I was holding up. The truth? I wasn't. I was unraveling, quietly, perfectly, like a top student with a smile that looked like control. Until one Thursday afternoon, in the middle of an Intro to Financial Systems lecture, I fainted. I remember standing up to turn in an assignment. Then everything went white. I woke up in the campus health center with an IV in my arm and a nurse gently saying, "You're severely dehydrated and showing signs of exhaustion. You need to rest and talk to someone." Rest? I didn't know what that was. 2 days later, the university sent me an email. Mandatory counseling intake. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a condition of continued enrollment. Apparently, passing out in class triggers certain protocols, and that's how I ended up sitting in a softly lit room with a woman named Dr. Lin, who wore burgundy sweaters and spoke like the air was made of glass. For the first 15 minutes, I said nothing. I sat with my arms crossed, pretending to be fine. Then she asked, "Elena, do you feel like you're straining just to be seen?" I blinked. My throat closed. The tears came before the words, and for the first time in years, I didn't stop them. Because that question, it broke something open. Yes, I was straining, every day, every hour, just to feel visible, to matter, to be more than useful. I had built my whole life on performance because I thought it would buy me love. But it never had. Dr. Lin didn't say much that first session. She just listened. And that was more than anyone had done in years. In the weeks that followed, I learned how to sit with my feelings instead of outrunning them. I learned that working harder wasn't always the solution. That exhaustion wasn't a badge of honor. That being strong all the time wasn't resilience. It was armor. Heavy, lonely armor. "I'm not weak," I told Dr. Lin once, angry at myself for crying again. "No," she said gently. "You're just tired of carrying a life no one helped you hold." That line stayed with me. So many of us aren't falling apart because we're fragile. We're falling apart because we've spent too long pretending we don't need help. We've trained ourselves to function in silence, to hurt privately, to measure worth through effort instead of existence. I wasn't broken. I was unheard. I began writing in a journal, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. At first, it was messy, scribbles, fragments, but slowly the pages filled with clarity. I am not Chloe's shadow. I am not a placeholder. I am not the second choice. And just like that, the girl who had once fainted trying to carry it all finally let something go. I always knew Grandpa Harold saw me. When no one came to my middle school graduation, he did. When I won my first writing award, he clipped the article and mailed it back to me with the words, "You make me prouder than anything." Scrawled in his crooked cursive, that one sentence meant more to me than 1,000 well-dones from my parents. He was the only adult in my life who didn't talk over me or at me, but to me. He asked what I was reading, what I dreamed about, how college was really going, not just what grade I got. When I told him I wanted to study finance because I wanted to understand the world's power structures, he nodded like I'd just said something sacred. When he passed away quietly in his sleep one rainy morning in early spring, I felt the loss not just in my chest, but in my foundation. It wasn't just grief. It was the realization that the one person who saw me clearly was now gone. The funeral was small, quiet, slightly awkward. I arrived early and sat next to my grandmother, Eleanor, gently placing my hand over hers as she trembled beside his framed photo. Chloe stood next to our parents. She looked polished as ever, eyes red. I couldn't tell if it was from real grief or because Mom had just told her about the inheritance. 1 week later, I received an invitation to the reading of Grandpa's will. I didn't expect anything. I thought maybe a photo or an old book he wanted me to have. I almost didn't go until Grandma called and said simply, "You should be there." So I went. Mr. Carmichael, Grandpa's longtime estate attorney, sat at the head of the polished oak table, shuffling through papers like they weighed more than gold. The air was thick with formality and unresolved tension. He cleared his throat and read, All of my personal assets, including real estate, investment accounts, and savings, shall be equally divided among my 3 grandchildren, Elena Moore, Chloe Moore, and Joshua Lee. The room froze. I blinked. Did I hear that right? $1.5 million, divided equally. That meant $500,000 for me. Not a penny more, not a penny less. It wasn't the money that stunned me. It was the fairness. The rare, quiet justice of being seen. Not as backup. Not as the responsible one. Just as equal. We left in silence. But I should have known it wouldn't stay that way. That evening, not even 2 hours after I got home, my phone buzzed. Mom, are you free tonight? Dad and I want to stop by to talk. 15 minutes later, they were standing in my living room. I made tea. My hands shook, but I didn't let it show. I poured the hot water into 3 mismatched mugs and waited. Dad spoke first. Elena, your mother and I think it would be fairer if you gave your share to Chloe. I blinked slowly. She's going through a rough time, he continued. She just lost her job, her boyfriend moved out, and she's barely making rent at the bakery. Meanwhile, you have a good job. You're stable. We figured you'd understand. There it was again. You'd understand. I looked at my mom. She didn't meet my eyes. She fiddled with the strap on her purse and said softly, You've always been the strong one, Elena. Chloe's struggling. She needs this more than you. I felt the sting rise, hot and familiar, that old reflex to nod, to give in, to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. But something shifted. Maybe it was the months of therapy. Maybe it was Grandpa's words echoing in my head. Maybe I was finally done being the girl who smiled through sacrifice. I set my cup down and said, No. The word was small but seismic. Dad leaned forward. You don't understand, Elena. She has nothing. I kept my voice steady. And I had nothing for years. Grandpa didn't make this decision lightly. He chose to split it equally, not me, not you, him. Mom looked up then, her eyes sharp. If he had known how bad things were for Chloe, I'm sure he would have... No, I cut her off gently. He did know, and he still chose this. Because he saw us all. For the first time, he saw me too. Dad's face tightened. So, you're going to keep it? All of it? I didn't flinch. Yes. You're being selfish. No, I said. I'm being fair. There was a long, heavy pause. Then Dad stood up. If you keep that money, don't expect to be welcomed home. I let the silence answer him. They left without finishing their tea. And as the door closed, something else shut too. The door to the version of myself that always said yes, that always tried to earn love by giving everything away. For the first time in my life, I said no. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. It didn't take long before the war began. Just 3 days after our last conversation, the one where I said no, I received an official-looking envelope from Carmichael and Associates. The letter inside was stiff with formality, words sharpened by legal precision. Your father, Mr. Daniel Moore, has submitted a petition contesting the will of Harold Moore on the grounds of diminished mental capacity. I stared at it for a long time. There it was. The next move, twist the intentions of the dead to serve the preferences of the living. I should have expected it. My father had always preferred the illusion of control over the discomfort of fairness. And in his mind, the fact that I was given an equal share was proof something must be wrong. I forwarded the letter to Grandma Eleanor. She called me that same night. Her voice was calm, but there was a new sharpness in it, steel beneath the softness. I know what he's trying to do, she said, and I'm not sitting this one out. The next afternoon, she asked me to come over. Her house looked exactly the same as it had since I was a child. Red brick, trimmed hedges, the porch swing where Grandpa once read the Sunday paper. But the air inside felt heavier, like truth was pressing against the walls, waiting to be let in. She led me to the dining room and set down a thick manila folder and a USB drive. Your grandfather knew this might happen, she said, sliding them toward me. This, she tapped the drive, is the audio from his final will update meeting. He asked me to record it. I looked at her, stunned. He added a clause himself, she continued, voice quiet but firm. Anyone who tries to contest the distribution forfeits their entire share. My breath caught. He knew Dad might do this? Grandma nodded slowly. Daniel tried years ago to convince Harold to give everything to Chloe. Said you didn't need it, because you were independent. That Chloe was more fragile. That love should be weighted. I clenched my fists. That's not love. That's manipulation. I know, she said. And so did your grandfather. Inside the folder were handwritten notes, Grandpa's signature, his amendments, even a copy of the clause he had inserted himself. Any challenge to the distribution of this estate shall result in the challenger's forfeiture of their designated share. I exhaled slowly. Relief mixed with rage. He had seen this coming, and he'd tried to protect me, even in death. A week later, Mr. Carmichael scheduled an emergency hearing with all parties present. We met in a high-rise conference room downtown, all glass and silence. My father sat 2 chairs away, arms crossed, jaw locked. My mother was next to him, lips pressed into a line. Chloe had chosen not to attend. Mr. Carmichael began by reviewing the timeline. Then, without ceremony, he played the audio. Grandpa's voice filled the room, gravelly, deliberate, unmistakable. I have 3 grandchildren. They are all different, but they are all mine. I don't want Elena to feel like she must keep earning her place in this family. I don't want Chloe to carry guilt for being loved, and I don't want Joshua to be forgotten just because he's not in the spotlight. I'm splitting it equally. If anyone can't live with that, they don't deserve any of it. Silence. Then the clause was read aloud, word for word. My father didn't move, not even a blink. Mr. Carmichael closed the folder in front of him. Given the terms of Clause 14 and the supporting documentation, Daniel Moore is hereby removed as executor of the estate and is disqualified from receiving any portion of the inheritance. My mother gasped. I looked toward Grandma, sitting quietly at the end of the table. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't just protected my money, he had protected my worth. For the first time, someone had chosen me, not because I needed help, but because I deserved fairness. There were no dramatic exits, no shouting, just my father's face, blank and pale, like a man who just realized his script had been rewritten. After the meeting, Grandma and I stepped out into the wind. It was unusually warm for March. She handed me Grandpa's scarf, the old navy one he wore every winter. He kept every article you wrote, she said. He followed everything, quietly, but always. I looked down at the scarf, fingers trembling. He believed you deserved a life where you didn't have to fight for basic respect. I didn't have words, just the kind of gratitude that sits behind your ribs and rearranges your entire idea of family. As we walked toward the elevator, she said one more thing, almost casually. Funny, isn't it? How sometimes the dead defend us better than the living ever did. I nodded, because she was right. In a world that tried to dim my worth, Grandpa had lit a torch so bright not even their greed could smother it. The silence came first. No phone calls, no texts, no invitations. Then came the deletion, quiet but surgical. I was removed from the family Facebook group, unfollowed by cousins, and left out of Grandma Eleanor's birthday celebration. Not by her, but by my parents, who told everyone I was too busy now with her big new life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst came as whispers. Whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Did you hear she manipulated Grandpa into changing the will? She always was calculating. She used his love against the family. It didn't take long to trace the source. My mother, the same woman who once said, "Family is everything," was now fueling rumors like wildfire through distant relatives and church groups. My father followed up with an email to the family lawyer stating, "Elena Moore no longer represents the values of this family. We request a reassessment of her moral standing regarding estate matters." My lawyer responded with a single sentence, "We'll let the evidence speak for itself." I didn't fight back in public. I didn't write angry posts or confront anyone. I simply stepped away. The kind of stepping away that comes not from bitterness, but from quiet necessity. But even as I stood my ground, something gnawed at me. Chloe. She had stayed quiet through it all, and that silence stung more than any rumor. Until one night, almost 3 weeks after the legal hearing, I received a phone call. It was past 10 p.m. The world outside was dark and still. I hesitated when I saw her name flash on my screen, but I picked up. "Elena?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I waited. Then she said it. "Mom asked me to sign over my inheritance to her. She said it's just for tax purposes. She said you'd already agreed to give yours to Grandpa years ago, and that the rest of it would go to her and Dad to manage for the good of the family." My stomach twisted. I asked, "Did you sign it?" A long pause. "No," I said, "no." Silence stretched between us again, different this time, heavier, more real. "She started crying," Chloe added, voice shaky. "Like really crying. I've never seen her cry like that just because I didn't listen." I closed my eyes. "And I still said no," she whispered. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I spoke the words I had been holding in for years. "Family isn't about silence, Chloe. It's about seeing each other." There was a sharp exhale on the other end. And then, "Do you know how hard it is to realize that maybe they never really saw either of us?" I did know. I knew it too well. Chloe's voice cracked. I didn't want to believe it. I thought if I stayed on their good side, things would stay simple. But it wasn't simple, it was just silent. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't accuse her of complicity. I just let her tell the truth in her own time. "You know what I realized?" she said. "All those years I thought you were just cold. But you weren't. You were trying not to drown, and no one gave you a hand." I swallowed hard. "Neither did I," she added quietly. "That's over now," I said. "You just said your first no. That's the beginning of something new." We sat in the dark on two ends of a phone line, connected not by blood, but by understanding. Chloe continued, "I think I was jealous of you, because you made choices. You didn't let them define you." I laughed softly, not out of joy, but out of sheer disbelief. "You were jealous of me?" "You were free," she said. "Even when they tried to hold you down, you still made your own way." I didn't feel free. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I felt less alone. Later that week, Chloe texted me a photo of a book she was reading. Something about healing family dynamics. Then another, a few days later. Her journal entry titled, "Why I Stayed Quiet." She ended it with, "But not anymore." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. We didn't magically fix everything over one call, but that night marked the beginning of a sisterhood rebuilt from truth, not from roles assigned by parents, but from choices made in courage. Chloe didn't owe me an apology. She owed herself a voice, and she found it in that one small, powerful word, no. The first no is always the hardest, but sometimes it's the one that sets you free. The day I paid off my student loans, I didn't cry, I didn't jump or scream or celebrate on social media. I just sat quietly at my kitchen table, staring at the final confirmation email with a cup of tea in my hands. Then I leaned back in my chair, let out a long breath, and closed my eyes. It felt like setting down a backpack I hadn't realized I was carrying for over a decade. That night, I walked out onto my tiny apartment balcony and looked over the city skyline. I had transformed this space slowly, one plant, one piece of secondhand furniture at a time. The sofa was now a soft, olive-green chaise that wrapped around the corner like an embrace. The old curtains were replaced with white linen that danced gently with the breeze. I had planted lavender and mint in matching ceramic pots. Every morning, I'd open the windows, water them, and breathe deeply. The smell reminded me of peace, of something gentle and earned. For the first time, home didn't feel like a place I had to earn. It felt like a place I had built. But even with that peace, I couldn't stop thinking about others who had grown up like me, invisible in their own homes, taught that love must be earned through perfection, silence, or obedience. I remembered something Dr. Lin once told me. Sometimes, the people who hurt us most are also the ones who taught us how to hide that pain the best. I wanted to be someone who could sit beside others as they unlearned those lessons. So I started a small group. I called it New Arms. Not a support group in the traditional sense, but a space, a circle, a breath of air between bruised hearts, a chance to rewrite what family could mean. We met every Saturday afternoon in the community center's sunroom. I arranged folding chairs in a circle and brought a kettle for tea. There were no sign-up forms, no labels, no introductions with diagnoses. Just a sign on the door. You are welcome, just as you are. The first few weeks were quiet. People came and sat, unsure of what to say. I didn't pressure them. I told them my story, not every gritty detail, but enough to make the air feel honest. Then others began to open up. A woman in her 40s, who had spent a lifetime being compared to her sister, broke down in tears as she whispered, "My mom always called me the sensible one." But what she really meant was the one who didn't need anything. A man in his 30s spoke of growing up in a house where crying was forbidden, where anger was labeled rebellion, and where affection was performance-based. "I thought I was broken," he said. "Turns out, I was just neglected." One Saturday, a girl named Elise, barely 20, told us how she used to leave notes for herself on the bathroom mirror just to feel seen. "You're okay. You're not invisible." I didn't try to fix anyone. I didn't offer solutions or step-by-step healing plans. I just listened, held their stories like fragile glass. And sometimes, when the silence was thick and their eyes brimmed with the kind of ache words couldn't hold, I'd simply say, "You matter. You always did." That sentence, small, soft, but real, was the very thing I had once needed someone to say to me. So now, I said it for others. Again and again. We shared poetry. We scribbled anonymous fears on index cards and burned them in a little clay pot on the windowsill. We made playlists together, songs that reminded us of freedom, of softness, of possibility. We made collages of what family might look like if it weren't shaped by fear. I watched people shed decades of shame, one session at a time. I watched them reclaim the right to feel, to speak, to need. And in the quiet, I healed too. Not in some sudden revelation, but slowly, like a wound learning to trust the light again. Chloe came to a session once. She didn't speak, just sat in the back, holding her journal. But afterward, she hugged me for a long time and said, "I didn't know places like this existed." "They didn't," I replied. "That's why we had to build one." By spring, the group had grown. We had to move to a bigger room. Someone donated cushions. Another brought their guitar and played gentle melodies while people arrived. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't religion. It wasn't activism. It was simply recognition. One day, after everyone had left, I stood in the empty room, breathing in the fading scent of lavender tea. I thought of Grandpa. How he once told me, "The world doesn't always reward fairness, but it remembers those who choose it anyway." And I knew this was the legacy I wanted to build. Not money, not status, but a place where no one had to ask, "Do I belong here?" Because the answer would always be yes. Every Sunday morning, Chloe and I walk around Green Lake, coffee cups in hand, shoes crunching over gravel paths. the sunlight tracing the edges of the water like gold. We don't always talk. Sometimes we walk in silence, letting the rhythm of our steps say everything. Sometimes we reminisce about childhood moments that now feel like someone else's memories. Other times we talk about the future. She tells me about her classes, her professors, the girl in her cohort who's researching trauma-informed care for teens who've aged out of foster systems. Chloe is studying social work now, her first semester at the state university, and I'm the one helping pay for it. She resisted at first. "You don't have to," she said when I offered. "I know," I replied, "but I want to. This isn't about paying a debt. It's about choosing to stand beside someone brave enough to start over." She cried then, not out of guilt, but gratitude. The kind that shows up when someone sees you for who you're trying to become, not just who you've been. In class last month, Chloe gave a presentation in her Power and Identity in Families course. I sat in the front row, heart pounding harder than it had in any courtroom or support group circle. She clutched the microphone with both hands, her voice shaking at first. Then she said, "I used to think family was where I belonged. Now I know it's who makes you feel seen." There was a pause, a collective hush. She glanced at me and smiled. The applause was quiet, but it echoed louder in my chest than any validation I'd ever craved from our parents. That afternoon, we had a picnic at Lincoln Park, just the two of us. Sandwiches, a cheap blanket, and Grandpa's old cassette player playing soft jazz in the background. The same jazz he once used to play on Sunday mornings while watering tomatoes in the backyard. As the sun dipped behind the clouds and painted the sky in lavender streaks, Chloe leaned back on her elbows and said, "You know what's weird?" "What?" "I don't feel like I'm trying to win their love anymore." I nodded. "Even if they never understand," she added, "I'm okay now, because I'm finally living a life I chose." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the pedestal girl anymore. She wasn't the daughter who played along to survive. She was a woman who had peeled off the layers of approval and found her voice beneath. And I realized I wasn't alone anymore. We were no longer fragments held together by obligation. We were sisters, rebuilt not by blood, but by truth. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked. I thought of our parents, of the silence, the manipulation, the refusal to see us beyond our roles. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we did." She smiled, pulled her knees to her chest, and rested her chin on them. "I guess that's enough." Later that week, she sent me a message. "Started my fieldwork hours, got paired with a youth shelter. First day was heavy, but I felt useful, in the best way." I replied with just 3 words. "I'm proud too, because someone had to say it." And this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to do it. Every Wednesday evening, she still calls me after class. We talk about boundaries, about burnout, about how to stay soft in a world that teaches hardness. Sometimes we cry. Sometimes we laugh so hard we forget how many years we spent pretending we weren't broken. I've learned that healing doesn't mean you stop hurting. It means the pain no longer runs the show. It no longer writes your story. It's been over a year since Grandpa passed. Since the will. Since the battles and the lawyers and the rumors. My parents still don't speak to me. They don't ask about Chloe anymore either. But that's okay. We've stopped chasing apologies that won't come. We've stopped trying to shrink ourselves into silence just to stay inside a house that never felt like home. Now, we're building something else. Something honest. Something kind. New Arms is still growing. We added another session on Thursdays for college students. Chloe sometimes co-facilitates when she's free. She brings herbal tea and printed handouts. She sits beside 20-year-olds who've never said no out loud and helps them practice it for the first time. They trust her. Because she's lived it. We both have. One day, after a session, a teenage girl walked up to her and said, "You talk like you know what it's like to be both invisible and expected to be perfect." Chloe smiled and answered, "Because I do." And I stood a few steps behind her, heart swelling, not with pride, but with peace. Because Grandpa didn't just leave us money. He left us something more enduring. He left us the courage to rebuild something better. I no longer need my mother to say my name with pride. I no longer wait for my father to look at my life and say, "You've made something of yourself." There was a time I would have given everything, my peace, my voice, my very self, for that one moment of recognition, that one glance of approval. But I've learned something far more valuable than their praise. I've learned how to live without it. Now I wake up each morning not with the weight in my chest, but with breath, steady, quiet, and mine. I stretch beneath linen sheets in a room I made warm with color, scent, and softness. I water my lavender and mint plants, boil tea in Grandpa's old kettle, and step into the sunlight not as someone hoping to be noticed, but as someone who already knows her worth. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like not flinching when your phone buzzes, like saying no and not feeling guilty afterward, like walking into a room and not shrinking. It feels like peace. And peace, I've learned, is not the absence of noise. It's the absence of needing to be someone else, just to feel loved. I've stopped attending family holidays that leave me hollow. I don't force myself to answer messages laced with blame. I don't ask for a place at tables that only made room when they needed something. I've built my own table. I've built my own light, and now I use it. Not to shine in anyone's face, but to light paths for others still walking through the dark. Sometimes I still feel the ache. That part never fully goes away, but it no longer controls me. It visits like a familiar shadow, and I nod at it like an old companion. Then I turn on the light I made and keep going. Because this light wasn't handed to me, I forged it. From rejection, from silence, from years of being the responsible one who wasn't allowed to need anything. I built it from tear-stained notebooks, from therapy sessions where I said, "I'm not okay" out loud for the first time. I built it from the warmth of a sister's voice late at night, finally saying, "I see you." And most of all, I built it from the truth, that being unseen never made me unworthy. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the girl who was overlooked. I see the woman who walked out of that shadow and brought others with her.